to a clock on my PC, but apparently not now. We're live. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 6th summer school of the Connect University. We started the Connect University in 2015. It was an ambitious idea, but we started small, and here we are 6 years later. The 6th summer school we're organizing. There have been more than 380 events organized during that period and 150,000 participants. So it's been a huge success. We are now devoting the 2 weeks of the summer school to the interaction between digital and climate and the planet, digital for the planet. We are now nearing the end of the 2 weeks. We have a further session tomorrow, but this session we're kind of now close to the end. We hope you found it interesting, you've enjoyed it, and I should recall that if you have followed at least 7 sessions, and this could be live, or you could also watch them again because they're all being recorded and then put onto the Connect University website. But if you have followed 7 sessions, you get a Connect University summer school diploma. So who doesn't want to receive that? Some housekeeping points. If you like to pose questions, or you want to kind of see what other questions people are posing, then please log on to Slido and use the hashtag Smart Cities. That's not complicated, Smart Cities. I'll make a few introductory remarks and then of course hand over the floor to the eminent speakers that we've been able to get confirmed for this afternoon, and I will introduce them in a minute. My name is Gerard de Graaf. I'm director in DG Connect for digital transformation, and one of my responsibilities is the connection, the interaction between digital and green policies. Well, we're all aware, of course, that the EU wants to lead in the fight against climate change. We have committed in a legally binding way to climate neutrality by 2050. We have a commitment to cut CO2 emissions by at least 55% by 2030, which is of course a major challenge. But the EU has the ambition to lead both in the green and digital twin transitions and to harness the benefits from it. And it's a bit of an open door to say that we are not going to be successful with our green transition unless we use to the full the digital technologies that are already available, and of course those which are currently kind of being developed and the innovation that is going on, particularly in green tech. And so that's the first thing is of course to mitigate, to reduce and avoid emissions, but then also, which is a bit more the topic of today, is to help us adapt to climate change and the increased frequency of extreme weather. Maybe just to recall some of the facts about the ICT sector and the carbon footprint. This has been discussed already in earlier sessions of the Connect University. The carbon footprint of the digital sector has been estimated to be between 2% of total greenhouse gas emissions and to about 3.5%. What now matters is to keep the footprint in the low single digits, under 4 or 5% in the short term, while deployment of technologies such as 5G and other technologies scale, and then drive it to zero well before the overall target of 2050. Ideally, and we work on that in DG Connect, we want to achieve climate neutrality of data centers by 2030 and of the telecommunications and most of the ICT sectors by 2040. The challenge, just to be very frank, is the footprint due to the production, distribution and waste handling of devices, the smartphones and the laptops and kind of the iPads. Well, we are all aware of the huge potential of mobile and ICT sectors to reduce and avoid emissions, to help other sectors to reduce and avoid emissions. The GSMA recently issued a report that indicated that the potential for emission reduction, thanks to technologies, could be well over 2 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. And that's almost 10 times the global carbon footprint of the mobile industry itself. Further sources indicate that green digital transformation of the transport sector, mobility, can reduce transport emissions by up to 37%. And in the area of constructions and smart buildings, 17% can be saved on energy with existing technology. So here is already a clear indication of the potential of digital to help us achieve our climate change ambitions. Well, if you want to know more about that, please look at the recordings of the different sessions that have taken place last week and this week, where we discussed the impact of the different technologies such as AI, 5G, HPC, high performance computing, blockchain, etc., that focus primarily on climate mitigation, reducing and avoiding emissions. And all the material is available on the Connect University website. So please visit that and point your colleagues to that website so that they can take advantage of all the presentations and the discussions that are available there. Well, today, the focus of this session is more on climate adaptation. If you just look around you, I mean, we all read in the press, I mean, Canada, in the western part of Canada and British Columbia, the temperatures at the moment are close to 50 degrees Celsius, 49.5 degrees Celsius. I am from the Netherlands. I was actually born in a place that is 8 meters below the sea level. And therefore, the rising oceans is a serious threat to a country like the Netherlands, which is already below the sea levels, and of course with the dikes and the waterworks is keeping the water out. But with rising oceans, that is going to be more and more challenging. So we need to think, in my home country, they are thinking about adaptations, for example, in construction. The simple things like kind of electrical central boards for electricity and washing machines. Don't put them on the ground or don't put them in your garage anymore. They may need to be put on the first floor in case kind of flooding really happens. So these are examples where we need to think ahead, because the climate change will happen. I mean, we will see the effect of climate change, and therefore we need to adapt as much as we also need to mitigate and avoid. Transport and rail infrastructures with extreme weather events, I mean, they can be easily disrupted. So we need to monitor them very closely to ensure quick management in terms of damage. We are, for example, in DG Connect, we are working hard now on a project called Destination Earth, which is in effect is a digital twin of planet Earth, which will help us to predict extreme weather events, rising oceans, droughts, fires, etc., so that we can anticipate and, where possible, reduce the effects and the damage and the loss of lives that those kind of major events can trigger. This was discussed also during an earlier session of the Connect University. Well, so let us try today to focus on climate adaptation and particularly look at it through the lens of the local level, the cities and the communities, because that's the most concrete and the most visible to our citizens. And that's why it's my pleasure to moderate this session today and to introduce to you three very kind of experienced and inspiring speakers. We will start with a presentation by Dr. Asuncion St. Clair, who is the director at the Digital Assurance Research Center in the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. Then followed by Martin Brinskov, who is very active on the smart cities front. I will, of course, introduce all of them in a bit more detail later. And then last, but definitely not least, we will hear from Jarmo Suomisto, who's a project manager in Helsinki City, what is happening in Helsinki to prepare and to adapt to the effects of climate change. The order is a presentation of about 20 minutes with slides, and then we will have, after each presentation, say 1 or 2 questions. Again, please use Slido for your questions, and then we'll, of course, tap into Slido and ask these questions to the speakers. Then at the end, we'll have a full Q&A session where you can ask questions to all the speakers for about, say, 25 minutes. I mean, if we manage to stick to the time. But that's my job, so I will do my utmost to ensure that. So with that, kind of by way of background, I'd like to invite the first speaker, who I already introduced, Asuncion Lera St. Clair, to give us a presentation. As I said, she's working at the Senior Advisor for the Earth Services Unit of the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, but she has over 25 years of experience with designing and directing interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary user-driven and solutions-oriented research for global challenges, particularly the interface between sustainable development and climate change. And I found it very interesting that she's a philosopher and sociologist, which, of course, in this area of technology, it's important to have this multidisciplinary vision. I mean, it cannot just only be people who work on the engineers, who work on the technology. We need all other disciplines also to take an active interest and contribute to this. Asuncion is also a member of the advisory committee of the Sustainability in the Digital Age Initiative of Future Earth, a member of the advisory committee for sustainable development of the Catalan government, and she's a member of Horizon Europe, the mission board for climate change adaptation and societal transformation. Asun was also the IPCC lead author for the 5th assessment of the impacts and vulnerability and adaptation. So she's really a great expert in sustainability, climate change, and adaptation. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from her. And she has the floor.
Thank you very much, Gerard, for this introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here and participate in this very important Connect University event. I would like to speak today to all of you around the topic of leveraging digital technologies for a resilient Europe. And my presentation is going to start by actually introducing to all of you the Horizon Europe mission. And I wasn't sure whether our audience is familiar with this, because this is an important background to the efforts at the European level in marrying digitalization with adaptation to climate change. Just very quickly to say that the missions are a key innovation in Horizon Europe, are of the Pillar 2. And the most interesting thing of these missions, and I had the absolute pleasure to be member of the board building the mission for adaptation and societal transformation, is that the challenge we were posed to is to build something that relates EU research and innovation better to society, and that it reaches citizens in a much more direct way, and that also engages with the citizens. And the idea is to make sure that whatever we do has not only a very strong visibility, but also real impact. The missions are actually 5 of them. There is a mission on soil health and food. There is another one on cancer. There is another dedicated to coastal and inland waters. And the 4th one is around cities. I will speak to you today, of course, about the mission on adaptation to climate change and societal transformation, and emphasize these 2 sides of the mission, both the adaptation part, but also the importance of societal transformation and how the digital technologies are going to be fundamental, I believe, for making this mission possible. The challenge of the missions is that are intended to achieve ambitious and inspirational goals. Dealing with climate change very often is not referred to as something inspirational, so that is very challenging, but I hope that I will convince you that it is perfectly possible to make it ambitious and inspirational. We also were charged with providing a document and a plan of action that had a very clear direction, that could have targets that are both measurable but also time-bound. The impact for society and policy making is a fundamental characteristic of the mission. And lastly, but very importantly, engaging with citizens in the overall process, in co-designing, in co-creating and in co-implementing and also co-assessing the success or not of all the missions. So what we have done in Horizon Europe mission for climate adaptation and societal transformation after 2 years of a lot of thorough work and enormous support from the Commission, RTD, and many other sections of the Commission, was to come up with the idea that what we need to do is to accelerate the transition to a climate prepared and resilient Europe as being the overarching vision for Horizon Europe mission. And the key challenge that we want to put forward is that we need to turn the very urgent necessity of adapting to climate change into actually an opportunity where we make Europe more resilient, more climate prepared, but at the same time also fair. So it's balancing addressing a very important and imminent risk with the opportunity that it presents to really create a change that can move cascades of risks into cascades of opportunities. The three main objectives of the mission, and I know that this is quite a lot of information in this slide. This is our main image describing the main objectives. They are layered in this pyramid form, and there is a very important logic for it, right? At the basis, we have to prepare Europe for climate disruptions. And by preparing Europe, we mean preparing all citizens, all communities, and all regions. Governments at all scales, from local to national, but also at the European level, need to be able to better understand, to better have information for managing climate risks, such as Gerard has mentioned, heat waves, forest fires, droughts, floods, storms, diseases, and others. And perhaps what is important also for all of us to know, and probably all of you know, is that very often this risk is not that they come one after the other. They are cascades of risk, and very often they come together. Once we have this basic layer, then the ambition of the mission is to accelerate the transition to a resilient future by making sure that we pick and choose at least 200 communities and regions that they can then design a vision and innovation pathways, as well as develop the enabling conditions that will lead us to that vision of a climate resilient and just Europe. And lastly, on the top, the idea is to sort of distill from all these 200 communities and regions experiences and distill 100 demonstrators that will then upscale the solutions that trigger transformations and also further mature those enabling conditions and solutions. And I will explain why and how digital technologies are going to be a completely transversal tool to get us to all these three objectives, not only the first one, but also the other two, and the connections that is very clear that we have. And before I do that, I also, and of course, I'm a philosopher and sociologist, but we were a group of interdisciplinary background colleagues in the mission board. So it's important to understand that the term resilience means very different things. And it means the resilience of environmental systems, but also the resilience of social and economic systems, which include a commitment for equality, for gender justice, for engaging with different sectors of society, and also ensuring that no one is left behind. And lastly, is also about the resilience of political systems, with a commitments to inclusiveness, deliberation, shared values, solidarity, and respect for diversity. And you might be thinking, well, how can digital technologies may help us in some of this? So I hope to make the case that they are fundamental for these three different meanings and layers of the term resilience. The mission is now framed around 10 different areas of innovation and transformation. In the figure that you see, the squares in the middle are referring to the critical community systems that we thought are the fundamental pieces where we need to start with. This is not supposed to be an exhaustive list, but it is a priority list. It is about regenerating community and social infrastructure, and this includes all the different types of infrastructure, from traffic to buildings to the ones that are more on the social level. The second key community system is protecting human health and well-being. And COVID-19 pandemic has taught us, all of us, that this is also an interconnected issue, that without having a protected human health and well-being, it's not possible to be considered resilient in none of the three meanings that I have mentioned earlier. The other community system that we believe is fundamental is restoring nature and ecosystem services. The climate crisis and climate impacts fall upon an already degraded environment. So as we adapt, we need to restore those ecosystems and we need to really make sure that we have nature-based solutions at the core. It's also, of course, around water and water management. And the fifth one is reviving rural landscapes and ensuring that we have sustainable food systems, highly vulnerable to climate impacts. On the outside of the box, you see also what we call the enabling conditions. One is around providing data, knowledge, and digital services. So this is a very clear and explicit link to the role of leveraging digital technologies, but it's also around facilitating inclusive and deliberative governance, about improving education and understanding of behavioral change, strengthening sustainable and circular local economies, and evidently mobilizing funds and resources that will enable all local communities and all people to actually execute these plans. So what is the role for digital technologies? It's enormous. It's enormous, first and foremost, because as all of you know, digital tools have been fundamental for climate science. In fact, if you look at the history of climate predictions and forecasts, without computers, climate science will not even be possible because it is based on simulating the Earth system and translating this information into mathematical models that are then translated into binary systems, and we use computers to run the scenarios of the climate. So that's extremely important because that means at the basis, this is a massively data-driven science. And all scientific advances we have seen in climate science go hand in hand with our increased ability to have better and faster computational capabilities and also the availability of data. Simulating the Earth system is key to understand climate impacts in the longer term, but also the variability and the climate variability that climate change is causing all over the world. Large amounts of data sets and enormous amounts of data are a very rich basis that also provide a complete and fabulous material to then leverage machine learning applications to draw information from that existing data that without advances in algorithms, in ML, in deep learning will not be possible. So the role is cross-cutting. I will not discuss mitigation, evidently huge importance of the digital technologies for mitigation, not only because of what we can do in general with the digital technologies, but also because the energy systems are by themselves digitalized. So the digital transformation is already embedded in a lot of the energy systems. So I will focus more on the adaptation part. If you look at the text of the mission, the scoping document that will be formally launched, I was told this morning, actually in September, and going back to these enabling conditions, providing access to data, knowledge, and digital services has been a fundamental piece of what we think will make this mission a mission possible. So it's about building innovative data services and capacities, but also mobilizing research and innovation that can help and improve, fill knowledge gaps that we know we have both at regional levels, but also at local levels. It's around partner regions and communities that need to be assisted in scenario building and modeling, for which these digital technologies are going to be a fundamental piece. But it's also around the facilitation of co-producing data that is not only legitimate and credible, but it's also salient for the users. So we need to engage in this co-design of climate information transformed into services, so climate services and solutions, together with all societal stakeholders and also including citizens. We need to definitely improve the saliency of data and the usability of digital services, as well as their practicability at all levels, and very much in particular at the local level, precisely because a lot of the climate information is at a global scale. So that sort of downscaling the information is also a downscaling of meaning, and is a marrying of the meaning and the meaning making at the local level with the information at the global one. The mission further really moves things in the sense that we want to make sure that we are leveraging and co-constructing Europe's digital future. But there is the consideration that the EU-wide digital data spaces are going to be critical for the implementation of the mission. And they are going to be helpful also in overcoming legal and technical barriers to data sharing across organizations. Gerard de Graaf has already mentioned the initiative of Destination Earth, extremely important initiative, bringing together scientific and industrial excellence to develop a very high-level precision digital twin of the Earth. There is also the question of gigabit connectivity, which is around accelerating investments in Europe to strengthen the region's digital infrastructure and networks. And I have added there emerging regulations at the European level, both on artificial intelligence and the Data Governance Act, that are going to be facilitators of the implementation of the mission as well. So basically, the key message here is that the digital transformation, if leveraged, redirected, controlled, so the cost in CO2 emissions is not that high, may make this mission possible. And this is a very hopeful message that I completely endorse. And what I think is important to also see is that there is a rapid emergence of initiatives globally, European, but also globally, where the topic of leveraging digital technologies for sustainability in general is speeding up the thinking, is speeding up the creation of partnerships between knowledge that today resides in the private sector and in tech companies, together with multidisciplinary dialogues from different sciences across the globe. I have been, and I still very happy to serve in Future Earth Sustainability in the Digital Age initiative. And in the work that we did, I think it's 2 years ago, we came up with the summary that if we want to leverage the technologies, maybe we should be thinking about digital disruptors, like, for example, the unprecedented transparency that many digital technologies enable us for all sorts of things, not only for making sure that we have better information for preventing waste of natural resources, but also for enabling, nudging sustainable behavior. We can leverage intelligence systems to do all sorts of necessary things, not only intelligence systems that tell us where else to shop next, but let's use these intelligence systems for more intelligent goals, like how can we make our choices in a much more sustainable manner. Mass collaboration is actually extremely important, and it links very well with the ambition at the European level to make sure that this is part of a process of engaging citizens and bringing science towards the citizens. So the mass collaboration platforms and tools enable us to really practice deep deliberative democracy with different stakeholders and citizens at all scales. And even the use of mixed reality can be a way. Use simulation, use digital twins, use VR to train people to envision this transformation that needs to happen and to create alternative worlds that are the worlds that we want to move towards. So all these technologies offer us fantastic possibilities. And just to mention that just much more recently, the Coalition for Digital Sustainability Codes is an alliance of the International Science Council, the UN Environmental Programme, and various other organizations, is moving this discussion farther as well, also across the globe and at a global scale. I want to conclude, and Gerard de Graaf already mentioned, of course, what is in everybody's minds, which is this extremely scary heat wave that we are seeing in parts of the world where this is totally uncommon, right? Adaptation to climate change needs us to think what technology can offer. And I believe that that is a rather straightforward agenda. But we also need to reflect on the socio-ecological, behavioral, and normative nature of the challenges and the solutions. And here is where, of course, my pitch is for making sure that we really appeal to all of you who have backgrounds or studies or inclinations in the humanities and in the social sciences to bring your knowledge up to speed and to contribute to this debate. Because the second title of the Horizon Europe mission is including societal transformation, but that societal transformation is going to be the fundamental piece if we really want to leverage digital technologies for the common good and for a Europe that is resilient. There are many risks to which it is going to be very difficult to be resilient, and if not surviving this almost 50 degrees centigrade. As human beings, our bodies are simply not prepared for do that. So yes, let's leverage the technologies, but very importantly, don't fall into a technological optimism that the technologies are going to solve the problem. We still need to transform our values, our principles, and our preferences at an individual level, but also at a societal level. So I want to conclude by simply quoting a recent paper from a colleague who actually is now in a large company, Microsoft, making sure that the transformation and the digitalization enabling resilience sits on top of a base that is trust. We need trust, social trust, and digital inclusion in order to get us to this idea of planetary intelligence. I wanted to show this because it's fascinating to see that without the basis of trust and digital inclusion, the rest of what we need to construct may fall in place. So it's about values and perception, it's about sense making as much as tool making, and it's about using those technologies to anticipate the risk, to envision the risk, and to facilitate decision-making for a better planet. And with that, I want to make my last point, and I hope I'm not too late on my speech, that if we really want to leverage digital technologies for adaptation, for sustainability, we also need to democratize the digital transformation. And I really like very much many of the initiatives at the European level are around the democratization of the digital transformation. It's around governing the technologies so they serve everybody. I was just reading that one of the EU ambitions is greater digital autonomy, which is fantastic, but it's also around capacity building at all scales, improving digital skills, access to digital public services, and the important piece of deliberative democracy, because many of the options that we need to face are not necessarily straightforward. Many present difficult trade-offs, We need to decide on investing either on one thing or on the other. And therefore, dialogue, deliberative democracy is fundamental for this mission and also, I think, for a resilient Europe. So this is my message to all of you, and I would love to discuss the presentation in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Asun, for a fascinating presentation and also to kind of put it into the context of, I mean, both at the European level, but also that a lot of action is needed. I mean, most of the action needed also at the local level by us all. And what I think is also important, what you stress, is that it's in a way a positive vision. I mean, this is pretty, frightening when you look at what is happening now in Canada. But if you really want to mobilize people, you need to mobilize people also towards like a positive. I mean, we can kind of go to a world that's actually, we're not going to take things away. We're going to build a better new world that kind of is also economically. Because we always need to remember Europe is 10% of the CO2 emissions in the world. Even if we succeed magnificently, I mean, there's still a large part of the world that, I mean, we need to demonstrate that what we do as well economically makes sense, that this is a new economy that will produce a high standard of living and inclusion and fairness, etc. So I think it's good that you made those points without then going into the other kind of extreme of tech optimism. There's been a very lively kind of interaction on Slido and questions put, and we have some 10 minutes for questions. So let me put a few questions to you, and I think these questions are also very relevant for the other speakers that come next. I mean, maybe one question to start with on the missions, because you said there are 5 missions. One is on the climate adaptation, but there's also a mission on climate, and neutral smart cities. So there was one question like, well, I mean, are they not kind of overlapping at least, or I mean, what's the distinction between the two? And then there were lots of questions, maybe also about like the point you made about citizens' involvement. I mean, how do you, which is an important part. It was like the bottom of the kind of the scaling up. So do you have some kind of practical examples? I mean, of how citizens can best be involved, some best practices maybe you could share. So if you could touch first on those 2 missions and to what extent they're different, to what extent they're complementary, and then the role of the citizens in making all of this happen.
Thank you very much for those questions. Let me start with the relationship between the mission on cities and the mission on adaptation. We had lots of discussions around this. The very clear and straight answer is to say that the mission on cities is very, very focused and very, very centered on mitigation, whereas adaptation to climate change is part of the other mission, which means that we will need to work together, because what I think is extremely important is to make sure that we create value added in doing both mitigation work and adaptation work. But there is a clear division of labor to start with between the mission on cities and the mission of adaptation. But we will have to work together, and I believe that the implementation plans have that into consideration. Regarding the role of citizens, so as we all know, this is better said than done. It's not easy and complex to carry to fruition. But I must say that there is already a large amount of experience out there in Europe. So at the research and innovation level, there has been a big push for engaging citizens in doing citizen science for a long time. And I believe we have learned quite a lot on engaging citizens to be part of our scientist group. And this needs to continue. So that's one aspect in which you bring the citizens. The second is many countries and many organizations and many projects have already accounted citizens and citizen panels as part of their stakeholder group when working in a project. In addition, I believe that many European countries have already experimented successfully with citizen assemblies, where the citizens have participated in design, co-design, and also in evaluation of policies. So I think it's perfectly doable. And I can tell you that for the creation and the drafting of the scoping document of the mission on adaptation and societal transformation, we were planning in doing citizen engagement event in various countries. So they did 3 of them in 3 different countries in Europe as a trial, putting to them a consultation document and getting their input as to this design. So these 3 objectives have been discussed in this trial with in 3 countries. Of course, COVID came in the middle of all that, and we all did it digitally, and it worked wonderfully. I participated in the one we did in Spain, and it was really incredible to hear how many things, important things, citizens that were recruited in a random sample had to contribute extremely important points, and many of those ideas actually have improved the scoping document already. And the plan going forward in the implementation plan that all the missions have already done in our implementation plan, the idea that each project needs to have a citizen panel associated to it is one of the big recommendations. So there are many other ways in which this is going to be happening. But I wanted to simply say that I believe we are already learning a lot on engaging with citizens.
Thank you, Asun. I mean, the same questions will be likely put also to the next speakers. It's actually an interesting, we know all questions are interesting, but there's a particularly interesting question like, well, how would a smart city look like in 30 years? So I would invite you to start thinking about it, and then we'll come back at the end of the in the Q&A, and then you give your vision, ambition for a smart city in 30 years time, because that's like the 2050 horizon that we have. But before we get there, I mean, there's quite a few questions on the modeling, and maybe also linked to the extreme weather event which we're now seeing in Western Canada. I mean, some kind of participant is asking, well, was this foreseeable? Was this because we're all kind of surprised that this happened? So is this built into the technology? I mean, into the modeling? I mean, to what extent kind of is actually modeling kind of ready to deal with the unpredictable? What about the data? I mean, you put the data into a model, but the data itself cannot explain certain variables or certain developments. I mean, is there a problem also with relying too much on digital data and digital forecasts? So that's a kind of a cluster of questions around the modeling, and to what extent we can rely on that, and to what extent maybe we need to reflect a bit more on the modeling, and when we see such events as this week in Canada.
Well, I'm not a modeler, as you have already seen, but I can tell you that when we think about the predictions on trends, you will always see these graphs that go up and down, right? And that means that we always have these tipping points and these extreme cases. So the idea that extreme events, that the storm of the century, that a peak in a heat wave can come at any time is quite pretty much the result of a lot of the existing science. On the other hand, I think that to say that we have had quite a lot of improvements in the predictions in seeing this coming, but it is not something that we can be prepared for. So I don't think it's the modeling part, the one that has the response. It's the societal part that should already say that we already know that the possibility of having these extremes is very real and very clear. It's a combination of all sorts of factors. Some of them are anthropogenic, some of them are natural climate variability, but the response to it and the preparedness to it cannot be only based on the technologies. That was a little bit the point at the end of my presentation, that I mean, we cannot say, oh, well, we sit here very clearly until we, these digital technologies and this knowledge enables us to solve the problems, or enables us to tell, well, be careful because 50 degrees are coming towards you. Even if we knew, let's say a week ahead, like you will know into the trajectory of a hurricane, you still need to work on preparedness from a societal and from a behavioral perspective. So I think that combination of both is where the win-win will emerge.
Thank you, Asuncion, for the presentation, the answers to the questions that were put. There are many more questions. We'll pick them up and towards the end, and then I'm sure there will be still many more. So some of them may not be answered, unfortunately, but I've tried to cluster them. There's another question that I would like you to think about, all of the three of you, is on the haves and have-nots, because we need to make massive investments, of course, in climate adaptation, and then you run the risk that the richer countries are kind of going to be able to invest in more than the countries that are kind of economically less strong, and so are we risking some kind of two-speed world or two-speed Europe, in terms of a part of Europe that's very well prepared and another part of Europe that's not so well prepared? So that's another question I want to kind of carry over into the final session on the Q&As. Let's continue. I mean, the next speaker, Martin Brinskov, is the chair of Open and Agile Smart Cities. That's kind of entails more than 150 cities from 31 countries. It's a non-profit organization based in Brussels. Dr. Brinskov is an associate professor. He's a PhD in interaction technologies at Aarhus University in Denmark. He has many other activities, director of the Center for Digital Transformation of Cities and Communities, founder and co-director of the Digital Living Research Commons, director of Digital Design Lab. It's almost an endless list of activities and achievements, but just one conclusion we can all draw: he is a lead global authority on smart cities, and particularly in this context of climate adaptation. So we're very much looking forward to hearing your introductory remarks, Martin. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Gerard, for the very kind words, and thank you also for the invitation to be in this context. And I believe, coming right after the conversation we just had and the wonderful presentation, I think I find very well situated for the conversation I'd like to bring to the floor here. So thank you very much. So the title of my presentation is Virtualization taking place, and I'll explain that in a little bit, but allow me just for some background. So yes, I have these two main hats, and I'm very involved in standardization work, both on the global level and the local level, European level. So just to say that that's something that I know a little about, and also that I think plays a role here. So how is it that we do things in somehow the same way? And also, just for the record, well, I have a master's in actually information studies and classical Greek, so maybe a weird combination. But I think the trans and interdisciplinary approach is really essential. I really picked up on that from the previous presentation. I did my PhD at the computer science department. It was actually together with Lego, the company, and well, now I'm directing a center as associate professor there. I think the background is indeed the crisis that we've been talking about. And we know that they come, probably in three flavors. No necessary order here, but I would say from the local level, that the social and the economic and environmental are all important, but actually immediately, if you go just around Europe, and if you go just around, one city council and you ask the councillors, well, they would probably have different weights to this. So I think a starting point is really the heterogeneity of the crisis that we are facing, also on the environmental side. And I think one conclusion we can already make some years ago is that finding solutions isn't really going to cut it. We have to find our way through dilemmas. And that's, in a way, much harder. In a way, it's what we've always been doing, because there were never some quick fix to the big questions in the world. So how do we actually improve human well-being without, having a detrimental footprint on the planet? And I'm among the ones who think we have only one, so there is no escape to Mars or anything. We have to make this work here. There's the autonomy dimension very strongly put forward in the report that we see here, some time ago, and that has really been one of the main barriers. Suddenly, we couldn't just use, good faith and technology. We had to fold it into a global political background. So how do we deliver both protection and innovation at the same time, as the previous colleague also said? Well, clearly we have a lack of trust globally, maybe also at all other levels. There's a lack of scale of then some of the building blocks or the solutions, as it were, to parts of the issues that we are facing, and there's a lack of time. So what I'm meaning when I say virtualization is really, really important to understand. I'll get back to that part, but it's actually an old paradigm. What is new is that virtualization is taking place, and I mean very literally, finding the way to the ground where we all live our lives. So first of all, this finding ground, why is the local level even important? Well, we can just bring in, and just for that perspective, the economist's perspective to subnational government expenditure, which is essentially a massive part of the global economy, and in some parts of the world, in some countries, it's a quarter. I come from Denmark. Half the GDP, that's public spending, and half of the half, that's local spending. So just to say, this is a massive dynamic in any way. It can be seen as a muscle, as a driver for some dynamics, but it can also be seen as, where we need to fix things if we want to change the way that our lives are impacting the planet. The virtualization, what is that? So back in the day, they said, when the internet revolution took off, that software is eating the world. That's virtualization, so that anything can be represented digitally, virtually. Of course, as anybody with a background in cultural history knows, this is nothing new. I mean, we had the alphabet. We could write books, we could imagine worlds, we could create virtual, universes there. The difference is, of course, now that these have become autonomous. They don't rely just on our imagination and, social capacity, such as language and so on, to unfold. They can somehow be interpreted by machines. So this dual nature of you could say, the human reading, the human virtualization, and the digital reading, the digital virtualization, actually of the same text, if you will, because to some extent, the software can be read by both humans and machines. That's at the core. So what we understand quite well is the general part, the global, the abstract part of virtualization. This is what we all carry with us when we use computers and our mobile phones. But with this paradigm, which we see so unfolded in the big economies, most important, most expensive companies in the world, they rely on a virtualization which doesn't take place into account, which is detrimental for the places when that type of virtualization really sets its foot down and disrupts economy. I mean, we know of how the digital economies are really challenging for, let's say, older practices. We know how socially it could be detrimental. We know the fake news and so on. And of course, we know how important it is to have the climate and the green perspective on this. Then how do we couple that with actually the resource use that the virtualization takes? So I put here perhaps a quite complex set of elements together, but maybe if you see the recording here, you can go slow. I will go very fast over it. So green, yellow, and red, and some white things on the side. The green is what we currently understand quite well. It's how virtualization works. It is how data is created, how representations are created, how they are turning into models, more complex. They live somewhere on data platforms. And when they become complex, sometimes real time, sometimes capturing characteristics that are, we could say, realistic. So they mirror the 3-4D world, and we call them digital twins. Well, the thing is, you can of course have competing versions, even if they're realistic. And I'm sure the next speaker will come back to the point about what is the value of these twins, because they're mostly actually in the semantics, in being able to work virtually with the physical world. That part, the virtualization, we actually understand quite well. Underneath, there is the computing continuum, and that is the underpinnings, the hardware, where the data is actually living and is shared. And just to say very briefly, we actually know the bits and pieces, but now this continuum is coming together as a whole, and that we need to get used to. We understand that things can live in the cloud, and we understand that there's high performance computing that's needed. But then as we move to the edge being far away from the high power centers and with less capabilities, so reduced capabilities in computing capabilities. So actually, we have to decide what carries over, what can we do on the edge? Of course, we can have sensors sensing temperature, air quality, and all kinds of things, but we cannot do high performance computing on the edge. And the interesting thing here is that while currently something like 80% of data that is created and managed lives centrally in the cloud, it seems like that's going to switch to the edge the opposite way, so that much of the data, also because it's less resource intensive, we don't have to move it back and forth, actually has a lot of benefits to it. So we are looking into a future where the computing is taking to the edge, and you see finding place. There's also a time aspect. Some data never should go away. The national archives, we should remember forever who won the Euro Cup and the Eurovision. So that kind of cultural knowledge should stay documenting our ways of life. On the other end of the spectrum, sometimes we need a millisecond or less reaction time to hit the brakes or whatever we need to do. And in between, to some real time, is if I get it every day, it's fine. We understand the computing continuum quite okay, not in its total, but we are getting there with 5G and 6G and everything. Now, what is really difficult is the red part, the communities of practice around this. And I think that was really discussed in very good perspective before. I'll dive into that in a little while. So working with data, of course, we have the internet as it was in the beginning, sharing data, the semantic web and knowledge graphs and so on. We then learned, this can be managed very effectively in the data platforms. And now we know the Silicon Valley and the Chinese counterparts who are doing that on very different terms, different community of practice. Then for the complex modeling, of course, we have the manufacturing doing, jet engine simulation. We have the building information management. We have the geospatial information, really well structured. Again, different practices, and certainly not on the platform level. The platforms could offer this, but they don't. They do something differently, or they slap some conditions. And then the little VM, that's the virtual machines. So inside all of our devices, whether they're wherever they are on the computing continuum, they will be virtualized. Meaning you don't need to have the hardware, you can simulate that. And that little fact, well known since the Java VM and the V8 and so on, which is in every, many of the devices around us. That's something we haven't prepared for yet, to roll that out on the computing continuum. So that's just the technical part. And that's a big European problem, that these structures are dominated. outside of Europe, to the east and to the west of us. So that's the European problem. The European opportunity is that what Europe does really well is to work and operate in complex governance structures. So as virtualization is taking place, that's an opportunity to figure out how that matches, representative deliberation and legitimate agency, essentially well-being for people all over the world. So of course, we could go into what then happens on the different levels of governance, but just to say that the lower levels, in this case, the regional, the local community, and the place, have a very hard time actually working together because there is all the levels above it. And of course, there are very good analysis and initiatives on the EU level, but again, they have to work locally. And that's a challenge that we're still facing. So I'm approaching now, let's say, the policy side of things. I have another hat. So I'm, together with colleagues, holding the pen on the Internet of Things roadmap for Europe. We just, concluded 1 year, more years before that, but 1 year of taking stock across the world, but also across the market and seeing, so what is actually the situation and where are we going? So AI, IoT, edge computing, everything you just saw before. And we just put out this report last week. So looking into the different verticals, but also some cross-cutting stuff. You see smart city communities, rural, manufacturing, energy, automotive. There could be many more, but just to say, we actually looked a lot. How can these technologies be used towards the priorities of Europe? Competitiveness, the green digital transformation, inclusive society, and moving from these narrow value chains to more like value networks, seeing what the market looked like, all the trends and all that. So I'm mentioning this because what we are then seeing on the ground in the municipalities, among municipalities, with their suppliers, with their organizations around them, in collaboration, cross-border, and certainly very much with the member states and so on, that level, the national level, many things are happening. One of the main one is that guides are being produced to find a way through the dilemmas. Guides are being made, and that's one of the most urgently needed, you could say, things that we are actually in short supply of. There's lots of isolated suggestions to what you could do in this situation, but this is a very complex big picture. So one of these that I would emphasize a little bit would be the Living in EU initiative, which I think also, the Commission is convening together with some other networks, Eurocities, OASC, ENOL, Committee of the Regions, and others have been involved. But just to say that, why don't we just make some standards to figure this out? Short answer, that's not the solution. We can, down the road, we can standardize, but we cannot upfront even standardize, to see what is the climate part. So what is the KPIs and management parts? What is the technological underpinnings? So that's a big barrier that actually the institutions that we, in theory, could rely on do not deliver this answer that we need. It's not concrete, it's not validated, and it's not practically applicable yet. We work on the global level, we work on the European and local levels, and that's a clear conclusion by now. Just to see, these guides are coming out, the Danish one available in a very short while, and there's a focus on exactly this, what also the previous speaker mentioned, the data that we need in order to operate, and lots more. So taking this to the policy level, and just some concrete examples here to come towards the questions. So we know that actually the European Union is very active in trying to address these, build the capability and establish that to meet the future, where climate adaptation and the environmental side will be challenging. And we have the compass, we have the investments, and we know that different parts of the stage of development of technologies need different kinds of de-risking. And it's actually a very good question. How do you set all of this up to have legitimate agency for cities and communities? I'm not a big fan of the term smart cities. I represent an organization which has it in its name. I think it's a good marker for what we want to do, but it cannot be operationalized. But legitimate agency, I believe, is what we are striving for here for every citizen on the planet and its delegated institutions. So 2 very concrete examples. Organicity, that was a research and innovation action set up to do exactly this, to co-create with citizens, with companies, with authorities, and respect everything that needed to be respected. It was Aarhus, the second city in Denmark, London, Santander in northern Spain, and others who came together and set up this experimentation as a service to try and figure out, okay, if it's not just something that's coming top down, but something that's co-created, we call it top up. There's some top down, there's some bottom up. What can we in practice do? Very, very, I would say, salient future studies or previous studies for the mission work, for the new European Bauhaus, for that kind of work. So what is the experimentation process when it's embedded in society with cities and communities? What are the elements you need when you set this up? There's a nice playbook. I suggest that you go to the organicity.eu website and see it, just to say that we actually know, and they're quite consistently identified also through other work, what is needed for this kind of co-creative, inclusive experimentation. So that's the early stage. What do you do if something turns out to be a good idea and you want to scale it? That's the next one. And for that, you need some kind of minimal interoperability between all these things that come out and that work. The minimal interoperability mechanisms, just to cut it short, is a way to give the buyers choice, flexibility, as you would expect from a well-functioning market. And from the supply side, the businesses, you get a large addressable market in an agile way. And the benefit is reducing the risk, increasing the investments, and getting the innovation. Actually, exactly, which is the rationale behind, Horizon Europe, the Digital Europe program, the recovery and resilience facility, and so on. Now, if you look at it from innovation consortium perspective, so those who would respond to mission or respond to new European Bauhaus or respond to Digital Europe program and so on, you get through these minimal interoperability mechanisms, pre-proposal alignment, post-proposal synergies, and agile deployment when you have done this. So it's okay that you have something that's the Bauhaus. It's okay you have a mission. You have the KICs, the knowledge and innovation communities. You have so many things. You have EIPs. It's fine. It will work together in the end. And for the policymakers, of course, that's nice, because then you can use all these instruments and kind of in separation set them out, and they have kind of their own logic, but they will fit the market, and you will avoid the sub-optimization and achieve the agile and faster policy alignment that is needed, again, by reducing the risk, increasing the value of the investments, and getting the innovation. So what we did in Synchronicity, which was a follow-up to Organicity, so that's a 15, 20 million innovation action, was to see, how does this work if we do that? 6 months, we deploy 50 services, many of them in the environmental category, but also the, let's say, inclusion category, and some in other categories like mobility or something like that. And actually, it works pretty well. Here's one of the examples. I think actually it's from one of the slides we saw in Helsinki. So how can we integrate with existing capabilities such as digital twins? Of course, Helsinki is a front runner, so had that already long time ago. But then also, how is this situated in the same sense as we saw before with Organicity, well in the communities, as well as being available on a market? And we have seen quite clearly how that works. This is from the other day in Porto, very nice output, commercially available systems. So these minimal interoperability mechanisms, I think, are really at the core. You can explore them here, but basically they address the interaction between systems, the integrity of systems, and the impact that you want to manage from systems. 2, I want to single out is the personal data management. clearly a priority for Europe with GDPR and so on. In this case, it's championed by the city of Helsinki. The other one is fair artificial intelligence, championed by the city of Amsterdam. So just as very concrete examples how the local level with their champions, so their chief digital officers or the chief technology officers and the council and everything they represent work together to try to come up with means, not grand designs, but mechanisms that can be used to create reduced risk, increased innovation, and increased investments. So there's a governance around this. I don't want to go into it, but just to say that the scale of OSCE is quite large now. Very, very nice partners, both strategic and commercial, large and small. And well, since Microsoft was mentioned before, so who would Microsoft ask? What does cities and communities need? Well, in this case, for the digital twins ontology, they asked OSCE. Just very nice to be able to have a dialogue and be the voice of many local communities in this. And the Living in EU, I'm not going to go into any kind of detail there, just to say that is, in my view, the European forum where the digital transformation cities communities is coming together and is being discussed, as well as being, prepared for implementation. So there's a declaration you can sign. If you're not a mayor or a minister, you can sign a support statement. But there are 5 commitments, and they actually cover the gamut, I think, that we need here also on the climate side. I lead on behalf of OSCE the technical subgroup, and there we have on the EU 27 side the equivalent of the minimal interoperability mechanisms, but they're called MIMS Plus because they take all the relevant regulations and initiatives from the EU side into account. You can check it out later. There's a pretty straightforward way to contribute and to put that into policy. And actually what's happening now is that it's finding its way into policy. So this is a snapshot from the AI consolidated, coordinated plan, the 2021 review out some months ago. And there's a chapter on the public sector. And that references quite nicely the FAIR AI MIM, which is championed by Amsterdam, and the catalogs that you can then use if you want to buy services that reduce your footprint, right? You start to see the point. So monitoring, measuring the targets can suddenly be linked to procurement. You can buy impact. Not yet, but it's work in progress. Similarly, and this is very close to my closing, there is something in Europe called the European Interoperability Framework. And that is, in a way, minimal interoperability for public sector. Now, what happened was that the EIF is due for an upgrade or a review. And a study was done to see how does the EIF actually map to the work, the learnings seen before, about how the local level perceives these different sectors, because the local level is where everything comes together. It's like everything combined. You cannot not have it locally. And what is very clear is this T shape. Of course, there are sectors we need to cater for. There is administrative needs, there is safety, there is the economy, there's energy, there's mobility, there's water and waste management, and so on. But some things are in common. So just to say that these streams are now being evolved to actually using the local level as the starting point, which I think is very nice. So virtualization finally taking place into account and taking it seriously. I think that's very encouraging. From the policy side, this is also no surprise. Many of you, if not all, know that EU has an urban agenda, which is kind of actually also a territorial agenda. And the 3 dimensions they operate with here, and this is the new Leipzig Charter, which is the current formulation, is the 3 just. So that's the social, green, and that's the environmental, and productive, that's the economy. So that's the triple baseline. And then the digital as cutting across. And then seeing how that fits the different physical scales, the neighborhood level, the local authority, and the larger functional area. So just to say, we have a very nice home for this discussion of, the horizontal part of the T, even when we want to then single out the green. So the city's mission clearly situated right there. We could talk a lot about digital twins. I will leave it there since the next speaker will, I think, very eminently enlighten us on that part. So we could also talk. So actually, I think one of the front runners and one of the reasons why I'm not so much a fan about the smart city, in many ways, the agri-food community and the whole, the value networks there are more advanced than big cities when it comes to managing physical space. It's incredible how the complex, and inclusive also value networks have been shaped there. There's so much to learn from the rural communities and the smart rural communities. I want to make that point because I think it's actually very salient in this context. And just to also announce that we'll be putting out some work there. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look very much forward to the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Martin. This is a real tour d'horizon across many policy areas from the perspective of the smart city. So thank you for that. There's been quite a lot of questions, but we're running a little bit out of time. We'll have time at the end, but maybe just one question. I mean, because you became, particularly with synchronicity, if I pronounce that well, you have a lot of practical experience now of things that work and that do not work as well. I mean, can you give us like one example of that you say that really works in terms of climate adaptation at the local level, and one example that has been like a miserable failure, like will never to be repeated again, in 2 minutes?
I think I could do it in less. So I think I actually only have very good examples because it was a really, really good process, which also failed early enough so that things weren't scaled up before they worked. And that's part of the things, like test before you invest, right? So I would say green roofs, right? You put greenery on the rooftops so that when there's too much rain, it absorbs it. And when there's too little rain, you still have moisture in the area. And managing all of those rooftops, even if you can make a nice digital twin, which can point to the places that would be ideal, just managing, I mean, from a contract perspective, all of these nice ideas is a nightmare. A normal city has, I think Helsinki has 800, 900 systems. Half of them include personal data. So you don't want another contract for another little system that might be, adding a little fraction to your climate mitigation plan. But what really worked here with Rain Brain and this, very easy to use management physically and contract wise in every surface basically where you could put some green on. I think that's a very nice example. It's accessible. It's a small company. Any roof will do. If you have a massive pool of facilities, big, campus, sure, you can do that. If you have only one, that's also fine. So I think that's a very nice and very concrete example, which translates into, commercial viability, as well as helps the climate mitigation planners in the cities.
Thank you, Martin. Excellent. I'm sure we'll get many more. We'll hear many more examples from the next speaker, Jarmo Suomisto, who is the manager of Helsinki 3D Plus and responsible for creating, maintaining, and delivering virtual models over the whole city. He is kind of avant-garde in terms of infrastructure award. I mean, he's been also celebrated at the London Tech Fest with the main award winning. So 25 years of experience. I'm sure he's got a lot of that to share with us in the next, say, 20 minutes. And then we have a Q&A. And many of the questions that have come in over Slido, we'll try to kind of get them out in the open for further discussions. So Jarmo, you have the floor. And I see already a very nice first slide. Go ahead.
Okay. Fine, thank you. I hope you can hear me, and yes, I certainly hear your nice words and kind words, and thank you for the introduction. Yes, and welcome to the practical world of the city. So I'm a city servant, and I must be practical, and I must give added value and create services for the people for the good life in sustainable environment. So that's my focus. In my presentation, I tell you a little bit about history, even though it's about future the things. Then I tell a little bit about technology because I think it's essential to understand a little bit technology because there's so many choices to make in the technology field, and you can't do everything. And if you understand something about the main lines of the technology, so it's a huge and it's very essential thing. And then I go deeper to the Helsinki Energy and Climate Atlas service and tell about the modules of the service. But I'm coming from the Helsinki's mayor's office in the strategies department, and there we have a 3-person team, the core team of the 3D digital twins or geospatial digital twins. So we are not part of the city survey department, so we are in the city strategies. And that means that in the city of Helsinki, the decision makers and the leaders see that the digital twin and intelligent city models are so powerful tools that they are more than maps. The integrating those things to technologies and different data gives so much added value that the digital city thing is something very essential to the city strategy. Yes, together we have experience of 3D working and city models over 70 years. So for 3 persons, it's quite a lot that you understand. And the 2 guys of us, Mr. Kari Kaisla and me, we have a little bit more than any, which is on the contrary so super talented and intelligent and very promising and so. But in 3 persons we do a lot. We put all the components together. So in Helsinki we don't have a main consult doing for us, and we are not paying that. So we are ordering small jobs and small projects from different all over Europe, and then we are putting that together to the city models, and so we want to master the process ourselves, and we use a lot of open source platforms and software because they work extremely well also. And the next one, yes, this is something, yes, 3D and city models and digital twins, they are not a new thing for us. There has been over almost 40 years of 3D Helsinki. First it was for architectural competitions and of course it was visual simulations 36 years ago. But little by little it turned out to get more benefits of those. Doing simple analysis connected to the GIS data and then more and more simulations, real-time simulator. 20 years ago we made one of those in an exhibition and so building those things. And of course the change of the evolution of technology has been a huge thing. It's so we can do more and more every year or almost every month, and that's something that we must of course be careful of, that we can't do everything. We must always make choices what to do and what not to do. And that's one thing in this work that you must understand, and you must take careful steps to achieve something, and then maybe it's a wrong step, so you go a little bit back or to the side, and then you try another thing. So that's also something that we have learned during these years, and of course working so quite a long time with city models and GIS and those analyses, and in city planning as a city planning architect. So I'm also very realistic about these things, about city models and the potential, which is huge. But I never hype these things. I never promise too much to the decision makers or to the mayor or anything, because it makes no sense. I think there are companies enough who promise too much. It's not the way of city servants work. So we must be very honest to the people and so something. Yes, in that small video screen you see something about our city models, but I return to those, so we go to the next slide. And yes, this is the big picture of our city model or 3D digital twin work. So we have two production lines. We work with the reality model and we work with the semantic city GML model. I hope you understand the difference. City GML is OGC standard. It's semantics. It's a city model with database, and the reality model is only visual network or visual network of polygons, nothing else. But it's very visual. And so, of course, we collect the source data, then we have the technology, and the use cases are there in the light green box, and there are lots of use cases of these city models. I can say that there are hundreds of use cases, and then, of course, you must make choices. You can't do everything of those. You must choose, and yes, we have this project that we want to get benefits on this field of the models. Yes, but two production lines, and at this point we see that we need both of these production lines. On the left side you see the reality model, and on the right side you see the semantic city GML. At the first glance they look exactly the same, and geometrically they are. But even though the reality model looks a little bit better, and without the textures, you see what's under the bonnet there, and you see the polygon bridge on the left side, and you see the semantic structure on the right side. So there's the geometrical structure which you see, and there's the database behind that. And of course, you can enrich the data in the database of the semantic objects or surfaces unlimited. And so you understand the scientific power of the semantic model, and of course the visual power of the reality model. There are also other kind of models. There are computer game models. There are CAD models of different sizes, and IFC models which look the same. And there's 12 of different kind of city models, point cloud models, and hybrid models. But our choice is that we go on with these two production lines because they are useful for us and we get benefits for both of those. Creating services, we use semantic city model, and as open data, the reality model is much more popular because it's let's say it's easier to use. And when we put those together, you see that the accuracy is about the same. So it's about 10 centimeters and so, and the accuracy is same than in the base maps. So you can choose the base map or whatever model as they are open data as a reference file in your design, or whatever you do, the accuracy is always the same. So there's no difference, and you can trust that it's accurate, and you can trust that it's on the right place. And I think that's very important, that as a city planning architect, I really appreciate very accurate maps and models, because they make the life and design easier, of course. Yeah, and then getting benefits of, that's the platform, and that was the technical part of that. Yes, and getting the benefits from the model. Yes, you have the data, whatever data, and you have the models. In this case, we are talking about the semantic city GML, and that's the platform to get the benefits there. And integrating that platform to the city's processes and services. So it's normal process work or quality work or digitalizing the processes. So it's beneficial, very beneficial, and so. But all our data is open data. City models are open data, and all our data is as open as it can be. And so that's the platform for open co-innovation. For developers, we have developer clubs, and we encourage companies to use our data. Helsinki City Models open data is downloaded all over the world. One of the most interesting things is it's very much downloaded in Central America, and I don't know what they do it there, but it is nevertheless. But we see that it's only, of course, goodwill for Helsinki, and openness is our choice, and we don't have had any difficulties with that our data is open data. Of course, there are limits, like that underground infrastructure is not open data, and so we don't see why it should be or who has the use case. And then we have the strategic goals, like and then we can say it's something in the city strategy, and in general they are the smart city goals. It's the quality of life, it's the safety and sustainable environment, and so it's not the process, it's not co-innovation, it is something that's above those things, and that's the interesting thing for us now. So the strategic goals, and yes, just to remember that getting the benefits from the technology, from the city models, and combining the data, it's the technology part is about 25%. The other part is the cultural change. It's a change of the workflows. It's a change of thinking, set of minding. So if you have the technology, it's good, and without the technology, you can't do the change. But creating the technology and the platform, so the other part, the bigger part of the work begins, and that we have learned also. So of course technology is far ahead of the solutions and the practical use cases you have. But understanding this means also that you must have a set a lot of resources to do the change and to the cultural and the process work. Okay, and this is the same thing once more, because I think this is extremely important to understand, but of course. And the Helsinki city strategy it's ending this year, and we are building new, but the functionality was the focus in that way. And as we had the new mayor in 2017, and he was visiting our office, I took the strategy and overlined every goal that we can support with city models and semantic city models and 3D digital twin technology, and I find there 129 goals. And the mayor was really impressed in 2017. And, oh, this is concrete, and so we discussed those things, and so we came to the conclusion that the carbon neutrality in 2035 is the most important. And the mayor said that if you can do something to support that goal, it would be wonderful, because it's such a big goal. And so. And I said, yes, we do our best, and we look what we can do, and yes, this is also for the carbon neutrality. You see the heating of the buildings is 56% of the CO2 emissions. So it's the biggest part, and we decided maybe we try to do something to that part, because it's the biggest part, and then we created this, when the slide changes like this, then we start to work with this Helsinki Energy and Climate Atlas. And at this point, it has core modules. It is built on semantic CityGML model, and the first modules are made for the building or creating the understanding what's the situation now, and then more and more what can be done, and what's the result of the actions we done, and also with the alternative energy sources. And I go through these 4 modules, module by module, showing a little video clip of every service. So this service is open to the whole world, and it runs on every device, mobile, tablets, of course, computers. And the first module is the Helsinki building database, building register about building materials, building years, and building heights, and what's the use of the building, the renovation, and the detailed plan situation, and so and there are over 20 thematic representations over Helsinki building stock. Helsinki has more than 80,000 buildings, and they are all of there are shown there. Of course, we have buildings with new energy reports, and they are shown also here, so you can check the energy classes there. So this is building the understanding what's the situation now. Heating methods, and you see in the private house or detached house areas, it's very colorful. Everything. There's coal, there's oil, there's electricity, there's district heating, geothermal, whatever. And so this is the situation now. And yes, the next module is the solar energy potential. Helsinki buildings have almost 1 million semantic surfaces, roofs, walls in different directions. And the service shows the solar energy potential of every surface, which it is in different angle. And it also calculates the shadow of the nearby buildings. As you see, the warmer the color, the more you get the energy. And if you click whatever surface, you see that total amount of solar radiation, and then you can calculate according to the efficiency of your panels how much do you get solar energy. So this has been a very surprising service for many people, because the amount of the radiation is much more than people think that we get. And of course it's more in the summertime, but nevertheless it's almost the same than in Germany, and we all know how much there's solar panels in Germany. So this is also building the understanding, hey, we can use solar power. It's a good alternative for us. And then this is the heat demand of the buildings. This is a very powerful simulation using CityGML Energy ADE, SimStat, lots of data work, and so. And this is based on the thesis work of Technical University of Stuttgart, and there was Professor Volker Kors who kindly cooperated with us and directed one thesis work in Stuttgart for this. And this, I think this is wonderful service. You can click whatever building and you see the energy demand there, and how does it change according to the climate change. And then you see the potential, how much you can save energy, and you can save like this, and if you do these actions in roof, walls, window, or advanced, so renovation. So this is a simulation, and the material for the simulation or the data for the simulation is from the Helsinki owned buildings, because Helsinki owns about 5,000 buildings in the city, and that's a good so we get all the data there, and we can make the simulation according to that data. And the accuracy of the simulation of each building, it's better than 20%. So there's a little bit artificial intelligence and so in that, and this has been extremely popular service also. And the last service is the geoenergy potential, again an alternative energy source, and this is something because geoenergy is very effective in Finland. In Helsinki we have good solid base rock there, and it's very economical, and of course it's ecological. And houses are changing to the geothermal energy, and we saw the potential, and there's also advice how can you make the wells there, and what's the surface above the ground rock, and so this has been also been very popular, even though the electrical companies didn't like this because you are ruining our market, because the houses use so much less energy with those geothermal wells, and so but nevertheless this is the thing, and this is a good alternative, and so we can go forth. And this is the Helsinki Energy and Climate Atlas, and you can check it your own. And if you are more interested of the technical details of our work, how we make the models, and also the practical experimental work we have done, we have this Kalastama Digital Twins project, and this is about, let's say, 40% technical and 60% practical. So there's technology, there are the software we use, and such things. I don't mention this there. And here are the links, you get the PDF afterwards, and thank you, that was my part.
Thank you very much, Jarmo. Interesting to see all those models and how they could help more effective policy making and taking the right decisions. So, I mean, there's some questions on this about whether these models are policy tested, and what data you're using in this, and kind of what is your experience with these models, how accurate they are, or whether you need to kind of revise them from time to time. Maybe you could answer that question, and then we go kind of the full Q&A session with the other panelists as well. But this is a question particularly addressed for your experience in Helsinki. You waiting? Are you reading the question, Jarmo? Or?
Yes. I'm reading the questions. Yes, I take the last ones. Open source tools. So of course, CityGML is open standard. So you can use that. It's for free. Send the database. It's yes, Postgres databases are free and open. So is the database schema there. We use Asuncion platform for web services. It's extremely good. It's extremely open and such things. You can read more in the Kalasatama report. But of course we use the best software for our purposes. We are not afraid, and we are not avoiding to pay for good software, and that's why we cooperate with some companies, and of course it's a combination of open source and of course commercial software, and the result is what it means. We don't want to do it completely for free, but we must know what we are doing and choose the right tools for every purpose.
Thank you. So we've got about 15 minutes for, as many questions have been asked, have not yet been answered. I gave you a little bit of a foretaste of the kind of questions so you could think about the answers. There were, to say, a couple of clusters of questions. One was very much about smart cities. What's the experience? What have we learned? What about some of these kind of more innovative methods of using data-driven innovations? How do we reach adaptability? in smart cities, and then this kind of question like, okay, in 30 years time, how will a smart city, how will it look? And one kind of question that was an interesting one I find is like, well, all these city planning rules, because we will have to redesign cities in many ways. I mean, even kind of whatever, converting some parts of cities. So are city planning rules, are they potentially an obstacle to converting the cities, to making them more adaptable to climate change? Who would like to kind of, Martin, you would like to go first with that, and try to give practical, kind of concrete examples.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the very good questions. I think the term smart city is a placeholder in an era where a new material emerged, the digital. I think it will go away again. So what will be the smart city in 30 years? Well, it will just be the city, and this new material, the digital, will be normally integrated exactly like Jarmo presents it now. It's doing, it's practical, and you need it in order to make cities. But it takes some time to learn this new material, how it works. We can see it, the digital we can see as three things. I'll be very concrete in a moment. We can see it, yes, as a material. So for the planners, the architects, a spatial material, but with a different kind of spatial qualities. We can see the digital as media, as connectors, mediating between processes, people, economies, and so on. And we can see the digital as technology, the processes that create it. And the technology is by far the most mature, as also Jarmo emphasizes. The media, we are kind of starting to understand. We know now how the fake news and the vulnerabilities that it has introduced. But as material, the hybrid, the virtualization actually taking place, and how that then feels. We are experiencing when we walk in the street and watching our phones, or driving the wrong way because the GPS tells us to. We are starting to learn. It will take, I don't know, a couple of decades is my best guess, to learn this, and then to integrate it into the career paths and the educations. So I'm more interested in what will the educational system that produces the next two generations of city makers. And from the first presentation, we know they're probably much more trans and interdisciplinary as the current ones. That's where I would look for, the weak signals of our societies when we come together in, the built environment and dwelling places. And that, I think we can, if you look at what has been done in, the urban IXD project. That was a FED Open, really, some years ago, which looked into what will the future of cities be. It's very, very concrete. Yes, there are some speculative elements, but I can put the link in the chat, urbanixd.eu. I think we are starting to see that, and the cohorts, the students, the citizens, that are now, even after 10 years, they're, advisors to the ministers. They're in, successful companies. They are agents. They are people who can do things. And that's where I would look for those very concrete parts. I wouldn't look so much towards the how it actually is unfolding exactly as it is today. Of course, we can come back to the whole, what is the role of planning? Of course, the role of planning is to ensure that we don't move fast and break things. Actually, I think the biggest challenge in digital urban development is try to not destroy the cities, because they actually work very well. They are pretty resilient things. I mean, it's the most complex construct of humankind in our history. So I think I'll just leave it there. Let's try not to destroy cities. That would be, I think, an excellent goal while minding our footprint. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Do no harm is always a good motto. Maybe also, I mean, of course, we look very much at Europe, but half of the cities have not, by 2050, have not been built yet. And in China, one kind of stunning statistic is they use more cement between 2010 and 2015 than the whole of the US during the 20th century. So also looking kind of more globally, of course, the importance of designing smart cities is, and using materials that are kind of sustainable is really effective. And I mean, if cities would kind of know more about their footprints and citizens would know more, bringing a little bit the citizens into this, I mean, would not create peer pressure between the cities to kind of say to do better than the city like 50 kilometers down the road? I mean, do you feel under pressure, Jarmo, from other cities? Do you want Helsinki to?
Yeah. I think that the topic is extremely interesting, and so first I like to, as a former city planning architect and doing that work quite a lot. So city planning is becoming more and more complicated and more demanding, because you can design also the microclimate, the wind situations, and of course the flow of the water, and prepare for the natural catastrophes, and of course you can simulate the social environment and all those things. So it's not getting easier, it's getting more difficult, but luckily we have better and better tools for that, and hope that in the very near future we see new excellent cities that we couldn't create before these tools. But of course the digital city is becoming an essential part of the triangle where there's the physical and the social city, the old-fashioned city, and the digital is coming essential part of that. But and of course the one main thing in the cities is the social synergy. People meet each other, and of course, yes, today it's moving to the network, to the digital cities, and it's taking one part of that. And one special thing is what's happening to the city centers. In Helsinki, if we forget the COVID thing, but without that also, so in the city centers there are super fancy shops, extremely expensive shops, and the luxury items. That's for the city centers. And now that trade is on the web. And what's happening there? There's no need for that fancy shops in the city center. What's happening there? There are empty spaces there. City centers they are changing to the big restaurant areas. People go in the weekends to look football or celebrations, and when they can do it. So it's a change of the structure of the city. And of course, it's a change of the traffic systems, and so I hope in the future cities look prettier, and today and even today they are wonderful. The cities are wonderful. And then last thing is the global urban challenge. How we should build cities for over 2 billion people in the next decades. Without doing that and optimizing that in digital way, we can't do it. It's a huge project. It's a huge work. So
thank you, Jarmo. Asuncion, you like to give
Yes, I would like to
an image of your ideal city in 30 years' time? Probably Barcelona.
Yes, I want to bring here the social perspective and the human perspective in addition, although I think my colleagues have made it. I think that the city of the future needs to be a city where we not only have internalized the digital tools that allows us to navigate and live in the city, but also that we have deployed in a manner that enhance social cohesion. So the cities is not only the place where we want to have the good lives, but it's also that public space where we meet each other. But the meeting each other can be in many different ways, right? You can have unequal meeting spaces, and what we want is a city that really enhances the social cohesion of groups, that permits this dialogue, that provides a space for debating when solutions are not easy, and also that the spaces are not created in silos of different classes. So it's not only protecting that the city is not taken over by the expensive shops and so on, but it's also protecting that neighborhoods are not taken over by the bad tourism either, right? I mean, I'm from Barcelona, where we have these huge debates as to the good and the bad and the ugly in relationship to digital technologies and digital platforms, enabling the use of your private property in your home as an asset. And this having huge consequences on actually destroying social cohesion rather than creating more wealth. So I think that social cohesion aspect is, to me, fundamental. And I think it's also, of course, fundamental for addressing adaptation to climate change and the risk. I believe at the beginning, Gerard, if I may take on this question now quickly, somebody was asking about the haves and the have-nots. I mean, we cannot say we are a resilient Europe if only one part is very well adapted and the other is not. That is not going to work. We are in this together. And I believe that somebody very smart said it long ago. We judge our societies by the way we treat those most vulnerable. So we really need to be very careful in protecting the vulnerable and also in doing affirmative action towards making sure that the vulnerable take advantage of all these new wonderful opportunities.
Thank you, Asuncion. I mean, it's important, of course, now in the perspective of the Recovery and Resilience Facility that member states and all member states use the resources that have been made available to them in order to kind of invest in climate resilient cities and countries. So there's a tremendous opportunity not to be missed by the member states to actually kind of now make rapid progress, and so that we actually emerge from the crisis with a infrastructure, I mean, skills with the kind of the whole ecosystem, which is much better prepared to deal with the challenges that we will inevitably be facing. Also, I'm sure Martin and Jarmo have views on this, like haves and have-nots. And there was one question in like, well, what in our current economic system where it's all profit driven, it's more and more and more. How can we go? I mean, how can we just move ourselves to a more kind of balanced, sustainable economy and society? So your perspectives, we've got 4 more minutes, and then we conclude.
I think I can be very short. I think what we need to plan for is no planning. The big expansion will not be in Helsinki. It will be in the African area. It will be in in India, and it will be in large parts of Asia. And if we see how that is going right now in the biggest parts of Africa, the biggest addition has very little planning. Not to compare in any way, but to say how the RRF, so the Resilience and Recovery Plans, now Next Generation EU, after the pandemic is winding down, it's also not very planned. I know there are some, conditions, so much digital, so much green, and so on. But I think it's actually the same situation. So you remember there was this: how can we align policies without, making a grand design? So I think we need to plan for very little planning, and we need to create instruments and mechanisms that can be used in a very decentralized way and still save the planet.
There's also a tremendous maybe opportunity or even kind of responsibility for Europe to work with third countries and to share our experiences and our technologies and the planning tools. That is, I think, almost inevitable that we have to do.
Yes,
Jorma.
Shortly. Yes, the question of the there's always that what's the return of your investment and how much can you save and can you save in euros and in money, and of course that's important, but in Helsinki we also see the social return of invest, the meaning for the people. And one example is that what's the meaning for the people as they see that we have the for example, the energy and climate atlas. We are working hard to these goals, and we are doing something more than just talking, just political talking. We are doing concrete things to help people and we create services. And so that's also important. And of course, you can estimate the money, but those are also very important things for us. And a city can do it, and we can afford to do it. Why not to do it?
Well, not everything should be or can be measured in money.
Yeah.
So here we are. We were concluding. We're kind of at the end of the seminar. So I'd like to thank you very much, Asun Lerasis and Claire, Martin Brinskov, and Jarmo Suomisto for sharing your experiences, for answering to the questions. There were more, but we didn't have time to answer to more questions. I'd like to thank the participants for following this session, and I hope they found it interesting. And I should kind of tell you as a final comment that there's a session tomorrow, which is called Our Planet, Our Future, Children and Teenagers Fighting the Crisis, from 10 to 12. It's session 16, so it's the last session. So we're very much looking forward to welcoming you to that session. All of the material will be available on Connect University, and so please look back or look at any sessions that you may have missed in the past. With this, thank you very much and have a very good rest of the day. Take care.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Indeed. I'm just waiting for the confirmation from the colleagues. Is it okay? We're still live? Okay, so it's cut. I see here the comment. That's great. So yeah, it went very well. Currently receiving feedback from the participants. So